All right. So why don't we start with you introducing yourself and telling us why you're here joining us today?
Sure. My name's Prahlad Iyengar. I'm a grad worker at MIT studying quantum information. And I guess in the past few months, I've been subjected to like a pretty intense and from my perspective, very unfair disciplinary proceeding at the hands of the Division of Student Life, DSL, and the Committee on Discipline, the COD at MIT. My case is one case out of many that have had this kind of level of unfairness and injustice and demonstrated a crackdown on free speech, especially regarding Palestine, free expression regarding Palestine at universities. Um, and I think it demonstrates the pattern of crackdowns against Palestinian expression or expression for Palestinian liberation across universities, including at MIT.
Mhm. I understand you were disciplined for your interactions with the weapons manufacturer Lockheed Martin while at MIT's career fair. Can you tell us a little about what happened?
Yeah, so in late September, I attended the Fall Career Fair at MIT. I waited in line to speak with the Lockheed Martin recruiters, just like everybody does. And when the career fair staff decided to move them into a private room to speak with students one-on-one, I just waited outside the room, waiting in line. And for my conversations that I had one main conversation with one of the recruiters. I was accused of harassment and intimidation. I was accused of possibly even threats and intimidation because we spoke briefly about ethical concerns involving the role of defense work and what's been going on in Gaza in particular, especially Lockheed Martin's role in that. And in particular, I feel that Lockheed Martin is in some level complicit in the genocide going on in Palestine. But my behavior itself was no different than I think any other student who attends the career fair and asks questions about the nature of the work at their prospective employer. Um, the COD made this determination, in my view, based on really biased testimony, which at times even contradicted the video evidence. I mean, they had a lot of video evidence available, and sometimes it contradicted directly what was in the video evidence. But they rejected my testimony in favor of the accusations, and they used phrases like, I'm more likely than not engaged in harassment and intimidation, right? And these things are not findings. I think that they're speculative, and the process has been riddled with flaws the entire way.
Wow. You talked about this a little bit. I was wondering if you could speak on it a little bit more. What were your motivations for engaging with Lockheed Martin as a corporation?
Sure. So companies that come to MIT Career Fair, they send, representatives with the assignment to answer questions and interact with students for the purposes of recruiting them. And as an MIT student, I feel troubled that, at this point, over a year into the accelerated phase of genocide in Gaza, companies like Lockheed Martin, which directly manufactures weapons being used for human rights abuses and collective punishment, are, sort of welcomed into our community as if nothing's wrong. And, Lockheed Martin is the company that makes the Hellfire missiles that have been used extensively in Gaza in the bombing campaigns there. There was a video I remember seeing of a Hellfire missile that was dropped on a group of sleeping hospital patients in tents outside in the courtyard of the hospital. And they were out there because of overcrowding. The aftermath was, burning tents, a nightmare of mangled limbs, blood, civilians screaming. And we watched this on our screens, Lockheed Martin's weapons being used on, women and children, the elderly, hospital patients, doctors, aid workers, civilians. I don't think any of that is conscionable. So when Lockheed Martin comes to MIT to recruit students, they're not just coming, to recruit labor. They're seeking to apply our knowledge to the development of these kinds of weapons, like the Hellfire missile, like the fighter jets that they develop. And these weapons are actively being used in war crimes. So, this is a $1 billion company that's decided that this is an okay area for it to engage in. But then somehow a student asking their representatives questions about it is scary. I don't think that the Lockheed Martin recruiters feeling shame for their work, that should outweigh the perpetuation of violence against Palestinians. I don't think that's true. They're not equal narratives, right? The recruiters get to have catered lunches and free trips out to Cambridge and high-paying careers. Palestinians in Gaza have lost their homes, lost their families and their communities. MIT is basically privileging the narrative of the global elite, the Lockheed Martin weapons manufacturers, war profiteers, and ignoring the suffering of the globally oppressed. And we can't stand for that. There's a friend of mine shared this quote by the legal scholar Rabea Egbaria. I may have mispronounced that, but he's got this article called "The Ongoing Nakba Toward a Legal Framework for Palestine," and it was kind of unjustly withheld from the Harvard and Columbia Law Reviews. But in there, he says the quote directly is, "Scholars tend to sharpen their pens after the smell of death has dissipated and moral clarity is no longer urgent." And this is exactly the case in our current moment, right? I mean, we're in a moment of moral urgency, and we can't delay the truth any longer.
I'm curious what you asked the Lockheed Martin representatives at Career Fair. What exactly happened in those interactions?
Sure. So, I mean, I started by asking questions about what it's like working at the company. Actually, I started by giving my own background and what I work on, and then moved on to asking questions about what it's like working there. There's ongoing projects within Lockheed Martin. I asked them about those, and when they come to recruit students, they're recruiting them to work on those projects. So I asked them about those projects and what their company culture is like, the kinds of projects that they work on. And I expressed that I was very uncomfortable with defense projects and funding since I also work in a field that takes a lot of defense money, for example, from Raytheon, et cetera. So I expressed that. Um, and, I had this one conversation with a recruiter who was trying to explain that there's civilian use of their work. And so he told me to go speak to one of the other recruiters about sensor technology. So I waited in line again. And then, I didn't block anybody from talking to him or anything like this. I waited in line for my turn. Just when that recruiter introduced himself to me, the career fair staff stepped in and shut down the booth. And they said, they were going to take the Lockheed Martin representatives into a private room and they were going to take them one at a time. So take students in one at a time to recruit. So, I went there being first in line. I kind of went and stood first in line outside of the room. But I never got a chance to speak to the second recruiter because all three of them had gone into the room and they never ended up taking any students. But all three of them ended up making complaints to MIT, and they felt so scared that they took an Uber straight back to their hotel. And MIT says that this was an example of direct intimidation and targeted harassment because I used their names, right? I mean, they gave me their names when they introduced themselves to me, and I was speaking to them. And so, yes, I used their names to speak to them. But MIT claims that that means that I engaged in targeted behavior. So, they're trying to make it seem like I stalked them or I followed them or I tried to attack them or assault them. But all I did was wait my turn outside of the door. I think that this is an example of, abusing the power of student discipline, abusing the fact that the career fair staff and the recruiters have access to this narrative. Um, and they're abusing that to escape the questions of their ongoing role in the genocide in Gaza. I find that to be really shameful. I think that, I expect the representatives of a company to be able and willing to engage in discussion if they're going to come solicit labor from MIT students. So, there's no reason, I think, why students should be punished or accused of intimidation and harassment just because we engage with ethical issues when we're talking to recruiters.
Absolutely. And it seems like your actions were impressively reasonable given the circumstances. What has the response from MIT been towards you for engaging in this action?
So for this action, the disciplinary proceedings against me began in early October. But then I think, as many people know, on November 1st, MIT banned me from campus effective immediately due to two new incidents. The first was an email that I sent to the grad workers and the postdocs of the lab of the CSAIL director, Daniela Russ, who takes money from the Israeli Ministry of Defense. And in that email, I just encouraged those workers who, might be confused about the protests against their funding and who want to help end MIT's complicity in the genocide in Gaza. I just encouraged them to reach out to the Grats for Palestine. The second incident that they're citing there was an article that I wrote for the student-run zine Written Revolution, which was an academic engagement with the subject of pacifism in liberation movements. And MIT claimed that my article endorsed terrorism. It made people feel unsafe, even though I didn't, mention that I was going to use the article to attack people or anything like that. In my article made no direct threat. It made no call to action other than to establish mutual aid networks to subvert the state, basically. And so these were the punitive actions that were taken at first, and then I was subject to the disciplinary hearing, which ended up with my suspension from MIT.
Well, those are certainly some really strong accusations made by MIT. Were there any decisions made in response to these actions beyond just warnings?
Yeah, I mean, MIT enacted a campus ban, so they banned me from campus without any due process. The ban treats me basically as a danger to my own community on campus, and I've served my community in various roles, including, through volunteering with the admissions group, volunteering with a minority outreach group within my department. Um, and they're doing this in an attempt to paint me as kind of like a strong threat to the campus, especially as a repeat offender. So what they did was the COD chair, Professor Tamar Shapiro, decided to group my discipline cases together. So, I had this fall career fair discipline, and then I had also the allegations against me for writing an email and writing an article. And despite the fact that they, skipped over due process in a lot of these allegations, right? Like I was not allowed to respond to the allegations about the article, which were through the Discrimination and Harassment Resource Office. I'm supposed to be allowed to sit in a meeting with them, but I was never given that opportunity. Um, Despite the fact that there was no due process there, they grouped them all together. And I felt that that was a politically motivated decision. So I asked that the cases be split up. And at that time, Tamar Shapiro denied that request. But then, after a lot of public backlash from people of conscience regarding the free speech issue, regarding the fact that I had just published an article in a student-run zine, at that point, because it became politically convenient, the chair decided to split up the cases again. This time because it was convenient to kind of focus the attack just on the career fair and to escape the really, you know, fraught and very controversial issue of the free speech through the article. And so they swept away this, grievous due process error and the free speech injustices and focus their attack on the career fair. So these kinds of decisions to like arbitrarily lump and split up my cases are clearly politically motivated, and I think the rationale was changed because of the public pressure.
Absolutely. That seems very clear after hearing you speak to it. What was the ultimate outcome following that change in prosecution strategy against you?
So I attended a hearing in late November, and on December 4th, while I was still banned from campus, again, without due process, I've still not heard back about when I can expect the campus ban to end or for that process to continue. MIT suspended me until January of 2026, based on the alleged findings of the career fair activities. If the suspension holds, it will eliminate my 5-year NSF National Science Foundation Fellowship. This is kind of like a prestigious award, which underscores my intention of even coming to MIT. It is my intention to become a research physicist and study quantum information at a top university. In order to re-enter MIT, I will be required to interview with the same disciplinary staff who, started this whole process, the orchestrated the procedure against me. And I have to show them that I have changed and that I can, the quote directly, I think, is that I can assert my personal beliefs in a way that is aligned with MIT's expectations, right? So I view this as effectively an expulsion because it's entirely up to this exact same disciplinary body whether or not to approve, whether or not to believe what I say. And they've already shown in their response to my testimony that they believe that my words are not credible. I mean, they use that exact description to describe my words, my testimony. So I view this as an effective expulsion.
An unjustifiable one at that. Uh, what is your reaction to this development, and what actions are you planning to take next?
So I'm currently entering an appeal to nullify or reduce these sanctions. They're unjust. I think they're based on unfounded claims, and they're inconsistent with the disciplinary measures taken in similar cases. And I think it sort of reflects a breach in the student conduct process. I think that all of this is basically politically motivated. It's one story among many at MIT and universities across the country. Everywhere the right to protest for Palestine, the right to even just platform your voice in writing, and express alignment with the Palestinian cause. This is being attacked from universities who are completely under the spell of the incoming right-wing government and the right-wing pressures that they're facing. Donald Trump will continue to finance genocide in Palestine. Joe Biden has only done that over his last few years as president. Now more than ever, we need universities to be a place where truth can be spoken to power. But we're seeing, ever more often that the university system is basically being used to punish pro-Palestinian activism. So we need to be able to speak truth to power, or else it'll be stifled for good. And my call to action to folks out there is to please raise your voice in solidarity and support for Palestine, support for Lebanon, support for Syria, support for all these places that have come under the influence of American imperialism and Zionism, and demand that university administrations like MIT revoke or reduce the severity of the punishments on pro-Palestinian advocacy.
Prahlad, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with me. Is there anything else you'd like to close out with?
Yeah, I do want to just end by saying, this is an area where or a time when we have to be extremely steadfast. Um, this is not my story of being suspended is not a story that I think should cause people to be disheartened, right? MIT only chooses to go this length because what we're doing is working. What we're doing is causing changes and ripples at the fundamental foundations of MIT. So I think it's really important for people to continue protesting, for people to continue raising their voices, and to remember that our example and our lead is always the people of Gaza, the people who have been steadfast through decades of oppression, decades of settler colonialism, and this past year of over a year of accelerated phase of genocide, a genocide which began back in the Nakba of 1948, right? So I think that, I hope that people remain steadfast. I know that we're entering an area, a time of serious repression, but we need to stand strong against it.
Thanks so much.